Anakin and Ahsoka have been tasked to defeat a Separatist blockade over Ryloth, controlled by Trade Federation extremist Martuk, who has been supporting a ground invasion of the planet. Ahsoka is preparing for her first time being the sole commander of Blue Squadron. Both R7-A7 and Anakin tell her to not be nervous, with her instead hoping that she does her superiors proud. They quickly launch into space and approach the blockade, with Took launching Vulture droids in response. Anakin joins Yularen on the bridge of the Resolute, where they can monitor the battle from afar, with Ahsoka taking her forces on the offense, intending to clear a path. Took decides to wait and see what her plan is before he decides to launch reinforcements to foil it. Ahsoka assumes that Yularen is just overreacting when he tells her to retreat and pushes on with her plan, though Yularen wants them to return to reinforce the fleet, with even Anakin telling her to retreat, which she also disobeys. Ahsoka starts to lose clones in her squadron as the Vulture droids highly outnumber them. Ahsoka frustratingly relents after Anakin again orders her to return. As the attack on the Resolute and surrounding Venators increases, they become unable to defend themselves, with Blue Squadron not being able to reach them in time before a Vulture droid crashes directly into the Resolute's bridge. The attack has caused devastating damage, including injuring Yularen, with the fleet deciding to retreat, but not before the Venator, the Redeemer, is destroyed in the process. Ahsoka and Blue Squadron attempt to land in the Resolute's hangar when Axe's power converters fail, causing his fighter to explode. When Ahsoka does finally return to the Resolute, she only has 2 surviving members of her squad left. In the hangar, Anakin informs Ahsoka of how disappointed he is in her and tells her that she needs to think of the bigger picture in this war and that she must obey her superiors, which leads to her stating back that he's done the same in the past, which he can only relate with her on. He assures her that it wasn't her fault, but she can't help but feel responsible for all the pilots she lost. Ahsoka is visiting Yularen in the medical bay, where she apologizes for her recklessness, before Rex is sent to request her presence back in the hangar. Unbeknownst to Ahsoka, Yularen was awake during this. Ahsoka is shocked to learn from Anakin that they are to continue with their attack after they suffered high losses, but Anakin states that they must do it for the Twi'leks, and after Anakin tells Ahsoka he doesn't have a plan and not to worry, it causes her to get annoyed at him, stating they can't simply just break through the blockade, causing Anakin to order her to go to her quarters and calm down. Took decides to order his forces into position, having studied Anakin's tactics and knowing he'll be back soon. Anakin has ordered the evacuation of the Venator known as Defender. This confuses Ahsoka, who asks Anakin what he's up to. He tells her that he took her advice, partially agreeing he can't simply just attack the blockade, and also that his plans put a lot of lives in danger, so he's decided to ram the Defender directly into the battleship, with only himself on board. Anakin fully depends on Ahsoka's command of the rest of his forces to distract the enemy while he flees in an escape pod just before impact, with none of Ahsoka's excuses against this plan working, as Anakin is firm in his decision. The Defender exits hyperspace and Anakin contacts Took, manipulating him into thinking that he is surrendering his entire fleet. Meanwhile, on the Resolute's bridge, Ahsoka shows the clones a unique maneuver that angles the hull towards the attacking fleet, thus protecting the bridge from the droid's attack. This maneuver will draw the enemy in, and then they can trap them with bombers. While the clones aren't sure of this, Yularen agrees with Ahsoka, having returned to the bridge after recovering from his injuries, with this finally giving Ahsoka the faith she needs to be determined in her decision-making. Took is made aware of Anakin's deception, but it's too late, as the Defender is already set on its collision course, with Anakin using the escape pod and getting a front row seat of the chaos that is about to unfold. Took wastes no time in fleeing, leaving the droids in charge, though none of them are programmed for this, with them deciding to attack the Resolute, falling right into Ahsoka's trap, as her and the clones outflank them. Obi-Wan and Mace's fleet enter the system, where Ahsoka clears them for planetary entrance, while Anakin is picked up in a shuttle. Mace Windu instructs Obi-Wan Kenobi to take the city of Nabat as the next step of their liberation plan. The entire population of the city is being held prisoner by tactical droid TX-20, who plans to use them as a living shield in order to prevent a direct attack. Kenobi and Commander Cody inform the clones that this is the Twi'lek's home and they cannot destroy it. TX-20's forces shoot at Windu's fleet, preventing the larger transports from being able to land, adding another part to Kenobi's mission. Besides freeing the Twi'leks, he will also have to take out the Separatist cannons. The clone forces land and approach the city on foot, but not without being fired at by Separatist forces. Clones Waxer and Boyle, wanting some action in this battle, are instructed by Kenobi to join him, with them using droid poppers to disable the droids in the city's exterior watchtowers. Successfully defeating the outer droid defense, Kenobi gets them to scout ahead alongside Cody and clone trooper Wooly, though they quickly split up, with Waxer and Boyle noting how the city is eerily abandoned. Cody and Wooly notice a Separatist patrol with heavy firepower and realise that the Twi'leks are all being held prisoner, with them quickly reporting this back to Kenobi, who plans an attack, with Windu clued in via hologram. They are unaware that a probe droid is watching them nearby, leaking their plan to TX-20. As Waxer and Boyle continue to make their way through Nabat's abandoned streets, they suddenly hear something, causing them to put up their guard before they notice that it's a Twi'lek child called Numa. The pair discuss what to do, with Waxer feeling sympathy for her, not wanting to leave her behind. As Boyle approaches Numa, she bites him in self-defense, not realizing that they are flesh and blood like her. Waxer takes off his helmet to show her, while Boyle gives her some food, with her calling them both Nera in response. With Numa not fully understanding the clones, they leave without her, but she tags nervously along anyway. TX-20 has had some droids starve a bunch of captured Gutka, which they intend to unleash on the clones. He sets the creatures on the specific droid that had done this to test how angry they have become, though they need organic meat, so end up spitting out and sparing the droid, to its relief. As Waxer and Boyle continue their scouting, Waxer can't help but wonder what will become of Numa, with her parents most likely having perished in the Separatist takeover. Numa decides to run off in a specific direction, with them being cautious considering it's the same direction a probe droid went, causing the pair to run after her. Numa suddenly stops and directs Waxer to follow her, showing the pair the place that she once called home is now nothing but a ruin. Waxer gives her a Tuka doll, which causes her to cry, with Waxer comforting her in response. As TX-20 continues to spy on Kenobi and Cody, he decides it's time to release the Gutka. Some of the released Gutka quickly make it to Numa's house, and the clones have to barricade the door before they can attack them. Numa, in the meantime, shows the clones that there is a hidden escape hatch within the property, which they use just before the Gutka can enter and fully attack them via the house's lack of ceiling. The rest of the Gutka encounter Kenobi, Cody, and the clones. As they engage them, Kenobi is able to use the Force to lure them all into one spot, and informs the clones to shoot the bridge that is above it, causing the Gutker to be trapped with him. Kenobi quickly uses the Force to vacate the area before he becomes their meal. The hatch in Numa's home has led the trio to where the others are located, with them explaining the situation to Cody. Numa, knowing her way around these hidden tunnels, has Kenobi decide that she can help them locate the prisoners while he gets Cody to create a diversion. Kenobi is able to enter the cells which once held the Gutker and surprise attacks the droids, with him giving Numa back to Waxer to look after as he prepares to make his move. Kenobi, Waxer and Boyle, having left Numa safely in the cell hallway, are able to free the Twi'leks, while most of TX-20's forces are busy fighting off Cody's diversion, but not before the tactical droid becomes aware of Kenobi's actions, causing him to turn around his AAT and return to the courtyard. Kenobi takes control of one of the Separatist cannons, and with Waxer and Boyle's assistance, is able to use it to destroy the others before TX-20 fires at it. The resulting explosion causes Numa to run out of cover and make sure that Waxer is alright, which also leads to the other Twi'leks doing the same in order to revolt against their oppressors. As Numa runs to help Kenobi, the pair are held at gunpoint by TX-20, but he is quickly overrun by the Twi'leks. With the cannons destroyed, Windu's forces are finally able to land, with their next objective being to liberate the capital and ultimately completely free Ryloth from Separatist control. Waxer and Boyle say goodbye to Numa. They ask Kenobi what she meant when she called them Nera, with him revealing that Nera means brother. Mace Windu has entered enemy lines in his goal to take the capital of Ryloth. His ATTEs are slowly making their way around one of Ryloth's canyons when they receive heavy amounts of fire from droid forces that briefly stops them advancing. The droids decide to fire on the rear walkers in order to trap them. To prevent this, Mace orders Commander Pons to bring out Lightning Squadron, which consists of advanced recon force clones using AT-RTs which can move much quicker. Windu uses the Force to clear the front of the convoy by pushing the now unmanned ATTE off of the cliff, before he joins Lightning Squadron by commandeering one of their AT-RTs. He leads a head-on attack towards their droid enemies, making quick work of them. Wat Tambor and his tactical droid, TA-175, spy on Windu via a probe droid, the latter wanting Tambor to prepare to leave, but he refuses, stating that there's no way Windu can take the city with the limited clone forces he has. Windu has a hologram conference with several other people, including Ryloth Senator Ornfree Tar, who he informs of their next goal to liberate the planet, with Yoda adding that they must also capture Tambor, which isn't easy due to the city being completely cut off outside of a plasma bridge. Windu decides that he has to request the help from Ryloth's freedom fighters, led by Cham Syndulla, in order to have enough manpower to make this mission a success. Tar instantly takes a disliking to this, exclaiming that Syndulla just wants to gain power, with them having prior history as political rivals. This doesn't deter Windu, however, as his focus is doing whatever he is able to in order to free the planet from the occupation and thus liberate the people. Dooku informs Tambor that they should manipulate the Republic's victories in their favour by destroying everything that they don't take with them in order to show the rest of the galaxy what the consequences of a Republic victory are. Windu and the ARF clones are hiding in a battlefield on their way to tracking the location of the freedom fighters. A Separatist patrol makes its own way through, with Windu staying back because he knows the freedom fighters will do the job for them before they shortly hear a commotion that confirms this. As they investigate, they are surrounded at gunpoint by several Twi'leks, including none other than Cham Syndulla himself. They are taken to a downed C-9979 landing craft, which has been turned into a holdout by the freedom fighters. Syndulla shows Windu how important it is for him to make sure his fellow Twi'leks are alright. Meanwhile, Tambor launches hyena bombers to attack all Twi'lek villages within their vicinity, making sure to prioritise the inhabited ones. Syndulla tells Windu that he won't help him due to him not trusting Orn Free Tar, disagreeing with what the Senator plans to do with Ryloth after the war has ended. Windu informs him that the Republic will help them repair the damage to the planet, but Syndulla just sees this as yet another armed occupation, though he soon changes his mind about working with Tar after Pons informs Windu that the hyena bombers have begun attacking the civilians. The pair talk with Tar over hologram, where Syndulla is annoyed at how the Senator gets to have a life of luxury on Coruscant, meanwhile he is having to lead the Twi'leks from the front lines. With the Separatist bombings pressuring them, Tar promises that the clones will leave once they have been liberated, with Syndulla promising not to revolt against Tar in return, with the two agreeing to work together, both wanting what is best for Ryloth. Windu and Syndulla plan an infiltration into the city by having Windu sneak into MTT transports carrying treasure from the Separatist other base that Tambor insisted on taking before he left. While he does this, Syndulla and Pons work together in order to create a diversion. The droids activate the bridge to allow the MTTs to cross, with two droids approaching them in order to scan for life forms. The droids open the rear MTT's cargo hatch, revealing Windu's presence, and before they are taken out by Syndulla and Pons, they inform the bridge control to deactivate the bridge, which causes Windu to quickly force push the ARF clones to safety while he uses a droid stap to stop himself from falling into the ravine. Windu covers the ARF clones as they are given the task to reactivate the bridge. Syndulla and Pons decide now is the time to attack, with the bridge being turned back on just as they approach. TA-175 leaves without Tambor and informs Dooku, before Windu quickly forces Tambor to surrender. Dooku orders the tactical droid to start bombing the capital, though before this can be carried out, Anakin and Ahsoka are able to quickly dispatch the remaining hyena bombers. With Syndulla thanking Windu for his help, the Twi'leks hold a celebration, having successfully freed their planet from the grip of the Separatists. The production codes for this story arc are CW115 for Storm over Ryloth, CW117 for Innocence of Ryloth, and CW119 for Liberty on Ryloth, being the standard for most 3-part Clone Wars arcs produced within the first 3 production seasons, having their episodes produced every 2 production episodes from each other. Storm over Ryloth was written by George Krstic, with additional credits to Production Season 1 series writer Henry Gilroy and Production Season 1 supervising writer Scott Murphy. Henry Gilroy wrote both Innocence of Ryloth and Liberty on Ryloth, with Randy Stradley having a co-writer credit on Innocence, while both episodes also had an additional credit by Production Season 1 supervising writer Scott Murphy. Storm over Ryloth was directed by Brian Kalin O'Connell, Innocence of Ryloth was directed by Justin Ridge, and Liberty on Ryloth was directed by Rob Coleman. Catherine Winder produced all 3 episodes, with this being her last 3-part arc before Carrie Silver would succeed her. It is highly likely that this story arc would have been planned as the initial final 3 episodes of Season 1, before the Clone Wars movie would take 4 episodes from the show's first production season, giving them room to move forward CW201, The Hidden Enemy, CW202, Mystery of 1,000 Moons, and CW204, Hostage Crisis, that while being produced in the show's second season, with different staff and supervising writers replacing Gilroy and Murphy, were ultimately moved to air as part of its first. The production of Star Wars The Clone Wars was favoured towards the editing, which aligns up with how George Lucas found that aspect of media creation very important, with it being the highlight for him to go through everything and make sure it is refined as much as possible, with him asking others questions to make sure they get the most out of it, with the show's editor, Jason Tucker, working closely with George Lucas over 6 to 7 hours. Lucas telling him that important elements that make the edit truly a Star Wars edit are the transition wipes and the fast intercutting of scenes, with it being similar to live action in how they approach it, though a show like The Clone Wars requires a strong sense of scene composition, with Tucker also stating that the tech they used on Clone Wars is like they were reinventing the wheel when it comes to creating episodic television. Lucas producing the show like it was live action was also reiterated in a Rebel Force Radio podcast with Henry Gilroy and Stephen Melching for Season 4, where they stated how Lucas wanted the scripts to be very brief so the directors could heavily expand on them during their process of shooting the episodes with the previous software, with the scripts roughly being 1 page per minute, though with production Season 1, the scripts could be longer, between 30 to 35 pages, due to the writer's background having them used to write scenes with more description, as is the case with other animated shows. On another interview, Filoni stated that he would add the humour dialogue to the episodes himself, with all of these different people creating more and more of what goes into a final episode way after the initial scripts have been written. It is a rough road that leads to the heights of greatness. Clips from the upcoming CW117 and CW119 are used in the newsreel for this episode, as well as a reuse of the generic clone army shot and a specifically staged scene in the Chancellor's office that has a higher saturation in line with earlier produced scenes. As the 15th produced episode, this was the final one that Henry Gilroy and Dave Filoni pitched to George Lucas before Lucas himself started to pitch the stories directly, with them wanting the episode to be about the real costs and casualties of war. Storm over Ryloth being produced before CW118, the new Padawan, features the original, non-orchestral version of the theme tune within its opening. The initial script for the first act of Storm over Ryloth had Anakin join Ahsoka in the space battle. It was changed to be just Ahsoka by George Lucas, who put Anakin on the bridge with Yularen, exemplifying how the episode focuses on Ahsoka learning about her mistakes and accepting her responsibility of what it is to be a commander, with them altering it so we get to see more of what it was like for her to deal with the casualties her actions caused, being a milestone in her character development so she can grow out of being snippy. Though her actions did still cause casualties in this original version, the removal of Anakin being out there with her enabled the focus of the losses to be more directly on her. The final episode showing how big of a responsibility it is for Ahsoka, with her being completely in charge of what these pilots do and ultimately their lives. Ahsoka's Jedi fighter and her R2 equivalent, R7A7, first appear within this episode, but sadly, the latter doesn't feature that much throughout the show, though the droid did return in Season 5 Sabotage, Victory and Death, as well as featuring in the Bad Batch show alongside the Martez sisters to hint at them working for Ahsoka, who did not appear in the show herself. The V-19 Torrent starfighter sequence in this episode was reused in the newsreel for CW301, Clone Cadets. Concept art created for one of Ryloth's moons reminds me of both how we were supposed to get a Season 8 story arc, mostly set on one of them, that wasn't produced due to the March 2013 cancellation, as well as the moon's appearance in both Season 1 and 3 of the Bad Batch show. Blue Squadron have unique helmet designs inspired by samurai flower and lotus insignia. Ahsoka is challenged in the episode by being pitted against someone who's more inept than the battle droids she has faced before, with the production team creating the character of Martook to fill this role. Initially, Martook's model was just Newt Gunray's with swapped head accessories, with Killian Plunkett having to do some crunch time in order to push the design of Martook to be as unique as it was in the final episode, with his final design's mouth being inspired by Mick Jagger and Donald Rumsfeld. Newt Gunray's model was used as a placeholder for Martook's during the previous test footage of the original Act 1, in a similar vein to how Padme's was used in place of Luminara's for CW110 Cloak of Darkness. Another area with something that is reused is that CW109 Shadow of Malevolence has some of its previs reused within this footage, with it having an earlier 2006 date compared to the 2007 one listed for the majority of the footage, as well as it being listed under 109, with this being the sequence of the clone pilot explosion. Martook's data goggles take inspiration from the mechanical monocle worn by the Kodam fleet officer in The Last Starfighter, with CG Inc. deciding to add the blue and red back and forth scope, while his name itself was named after Dave Filoni's cat. While CW114 Rookies features the brief initial appearance of the Lucrehulk battleship within the show, its first fully featured appearance is depicted within this episode, where they distinctively have it marked with Separatist insignia to separate it from the neutral-claiming Trade Federation, with Martook, Lock Durd, and Newt Gunray supposedly being an extremist sect of the Trade Federation that has aligned with the Separatists and who doesn't represent the Trade Federation as a whole. By Season 4, George Lucas would steer the production team away from depicting the Separatists using the Lucrehulks in order to focus on the fact that the Trade Federation was a supposedly neutral corporation, taking advantage of both sides of the conflict, and thus they replaced the battleships with a specifically designed Separatist one. However, by the time of Revenge of the Sith, the Lucrehulks would return and are featured as part of the Separatist fleet above Coruscant. R2-KT's model would have most likely been created for this episode and then retroactively added into the additional hangar sequence that was created to bridge the gap between CW118, the new Padawan, and CW101, Castle of Deception, for the Clone Wars movie release, making CW115, Storm over Ryloth, her first production appearance. Two specifically named LA-80 gunships appear in the hangar bay during the sequence where Anakin gives Ahsoka a pep talk, that being the Lucky Leku and the Spacewood Ho. Both of them have relevant designs to the story arc, featuring Twi'lek paintings. The sequence in the hangar was featured within the live-action Ahsoka series episode Shadow Warrior, though the location was switched to take place on Ryloth itself, which doesn't really make sense in the wider narrative of the arc, which establishes them as being the air defense of the operation, as well as Lucasfilm being perfectly capable of placing the scene within the Venator hangar, due to how most of the sequence was actually keyed in post-production. It only makes sense if we take the entire memory sequence as Ahsoka's vague, foggy memories, considering how downgraded the sequences are compared to their original counterparts. Despite the expanded universe stating that Ryloth is tide-locked, where one side of the planet always faces its sun, Mace Windu still has a blockade-busting deadline of one planetary rotation. This makes it doubtful that the Clone Wars is taken into account this particular piece of EU law, which aligns up with how George Lucas regarded it as a separate continuity from his own. The same room asset used in CW102, Downfall of a Droid, is used yet again in the sequence where Ahsoka is with an injured Yularen. In the editorial phase, Dave Filoni and the director, Brian Kalin O'Connell, thought there was something missing in the latter half of the episode, so Filoni added the sequence of the holotable with Ahsoka showing the unique Venator maneuver, the Mark Sable, which Filoni knew from the expanded universe novel Heir to the Empire, written by Timothy Zahn, with this being a way that Dave Filoni could reference Grand Admiral Thrawn when he was, at the time, unaware of Thrawn's inclusion in the prequel era's EU, with Thrawn being the EU character that Filoni wanted the most to add into the Clone Wars if George Lucas approved it. With how little we know about them, it's possible that could have happened in one of the unfinished Clone Wars arcs. The Marg Sable is referenced in the novel Thrawn Alliances, also written by Zahn, where Anakin tells Thrawn of it, which retroactively establishes how he knows of the maneuver. Though he hasn't yet used it in the reset continuity, that could change with Ahsoka Season 2. The Trade Federation view screen, first seen in The Phantom Menace, makes its Clone Wars debut, with Anakin conversing with Martuk with it. The commonly reused Jedi shuttle that was created for CW112, Lair of Grievous, is yet again reused at the conclusion of this episode. Just like with the episode's opening, Storm over Ryloth also features the older, non-orchestral theme within its end credits. The costs of war can never be truly accounted for. This was the last episode produced that featured the original non-orchestral version of the Clone Wars theme tune, though it would not be the last one to release, as CW113 was held back to be released in Season 2. However, it would be the last episode released to feature it within the end credits. The opening sequence was inspired by the Normandy D-Day beach landings, where the clones are essentially landing into enemy lines. Obi-Wan has to remind the clones that they are infiltrating people's homes, people have entire lives here, and that they need to be cautious because they're here to save these people. As the clones just want to do their jobs, they are narrow-mindedly focused on their mission and are insensitive to the people living there. Obi-Wan's main LA-AT is called the Crumb Bomber. As the LA-ATs land outside Nabat, several Gutka creatures are depicted fleeing after eating a dead Cancel, the Cancel model being a reused asset from CW103, Castle of Doom, where Anakin and Ahsoka ride them to escape Ventress and reach the Twilight landing platform. The Gutka is yet again another reused design that was unused from a previous project. For the Clone Wars, they decided on whether they should make them green and reptilious, or whether they should be a unique purple colour, before they ultimately settled on the orange scorpion-like texture to fit in with the desert surroundings of Ryloth. They all use the same model in the episode, but the way their textures are painted makes them look like they have a level of variety to them. The script depicted Nabat as it being this ancient Middle Eastern society, like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the city taking the role of an oasis in the middle of a desert that looked much more like a huge prison complex. This aligns up with how the original intention was for the Twi'leks to be held in this prison-like facility with huge gun towers, with the story being based on the guns of Navarone. A depiction of this original idea is shown in the bonus art book for the Clone Wars Season 1, as well as an alternative piece within the art of the Clone Wars. Several other pieces of concept art were created with this version of the location, which were featured on the Season 1 Blu-ray release, including the clones encountering the huge exterior wall, the clones on a street where the buildings tower high above them, reminding me of the Safe House complex in Andor, only more gritty, and a more grandiose courtyard, which is presumably where the climax of the episode was to take place. These initial designs, created by Fang Li, are dated to January 2007. The design they ultimately went with in the final episode was made to look like a poor town ravaged by war, to add more sympathy to the captured Twi'leks, being based on Beirut, to have a more modern depiction of warfare. These late in the back designs are dated a month later to February 2007, showing that it was decided pretty quickly to revise the location. This is the first production episode for the Separatist probe droids, with them initially being designed for this episode before being used again in CW124 Defenders of Peace, which, while being produced after this episode, was moved forward in the final Season 1 release order to air before it. This episode has one of the main things that Filoni was interested in depicting when tasked with bringing this show to life, that being the contrast of a soldier with a child, with it being one of his favourite episodes. Stuart Lee, who was at this point a layout artist before he became a director, created the sequence where the clones first meet Numa, unconsciously utilising his experience as a father when creating it. Numa was the first time that the production team had done a small child character, with the 2D design department not initially knowing how they were going to approach her design, with the main goal being that she had to look innocent. They also established that a Twi'lek's Leku should be a relative size to the person as a whole. Dave Filoni decided to desaturate the environment of Ryloth to give it a lifeless, colourless look, to show how it's been affected by war so heavily that it's lost all of its colour. It's blanketed in dust, which in turn makes Numa stand out much more. They wanted to make sure that the clone troopers would get to show some compassion and be split on what to do with Numa, showing their individuality even more. Numa is an example of what is happening throughout the entire galaxy at this very moment due to the war. This episode was the first to use the Separatist Command Center asset, which would later be reused in CW124 Defenders of Peace. The display screens shown in this episode are reminiscent of the Millennium Falcon's targeting grid. This display screen at one point in the episode reads Comic Relief in Aurebesh. The tactical droid asset also made its production debut in this episode. They were to act as a more capable villain compared to the regular battle droids, but unlike previous unique villains, the asset would be reusable, with them also allowing Dooku and Ventress to not keep reappearing just to get defeated. The voice of the tactical droid in this episode, TX-20, was partially inspired by the voice of Lucifer in the original Battlestar Galactica, but as a whole, their voices and paint schemes would change between episodes. Filoni compares the tactical droid to C-3PO, always knowing the odds of the situation, also stating that the tactical droid is a character who would mockingly ask the Twi'leks how their life as slaves is going. The variety in the depiction of the Twi'leks was another feat for the production team, being able to accomplish having multiple faces and body types, which is a step up from the pirate gang variety created in the previous production episode CW116 Dooku Captured. Filoni stated to Lucas that he wanted every episode to have this level of variety going forward. When Obi-Wan takes control of the proton cannon, an Aurebesh reference to THX-1138 is depicted with X:11, Y:38. Dave Filoni felt that having Numa simply calling the clones brother was a nice touching moment to the episode, with Henry Gilroy relating the relationship between them to the show's overall theme of the costs of war, with her being a narrative device for the clones who went from not caring to becoming aware of how important her and the other Twi'leks' lives are. Catherine Tabor personally headcanoned that Numa was a descendant of both Mission Veo and Vete, two expanded universe Twi'leks she had voiced beforehand. Numa returns in Star Wars Rebels, still being voiced by Catherine Tabor, but as an adult, as part of Cham Syndulla's Freedom Fighters, with her having the word boil written in Aurebesh on the upper part of her left arm, in remembrance of the clones who had saved her people. Compromise is a virtue to be cultivated, not a weakness to be despised. Liberty on Ryloth is the first episode of the show produced after CW118, The New Padawan, that features the more orchestral Clone Wars opening theme, which was absent from the last 2 episodes. This episode is one that Henry Gilroy looked forward to writing way earlier in the show than it ended up being, with it allowing them to really show how Mace is a powerful and inspiring Force-wielding leader. The initial script for the episode had Mace use his lightsaber to cut open the canopy of the fallen walker. In the final episode, however, he uses the Force to shatter the glass. This came from director Rob Coleman and also aligned up with an expanded universe talent of Windu's that has him being proficient at finding and taking advantage of shatter points. The script also had Mace rescue Twi'leks from a prison that was suspended over a volcano. The production concepts for this, however, looked too similar to Mustafar for George Lucas's liking, and the idea was abandoned, with this fire hellscape-like environment being how the expanded universe would depict Ryloth, with the production team initially doing research on EU material before taking it to George Lucas, who would review and change things to how he personally saw them. Killian Plunkett was tasked with creating Mace's design early in the show's production, before both Mace had a major appearance in the show, as well as before Killian himself was brought on as a full-time artist. He made sure that Mace had a dynamic face, not wanting to depict him with a permanent frown, unlike Clone Wars 2003, which he was depicted to have most of the time, with them instead deciding to marry the dynamics of Windu's live-action appearance with what had already been templated with the Clone Wars design of Anakin. Mace Windu was originally concepted to feature clone armor on his shoulders like Anakin and Obi-Wan, but with the addition of a cape. But most likely due to budget limitations with cloth simulation, this design was abandoned and he was given the same design as all secondary Jedi characters, with them having their robes mixed with clone wrist armor. A design that would be adopted by Obi-Wan and Anakin in production Season 3. Mace's final Season 1 design seems to have also been planned to stay for the remainder of the unfinished Clone Wars episodes due to cloth simulation costs when it came to the sleeves of the Jedi robes, with only Obi-Wan and Anakin seemingly getting their models updated at first for this during the design and model phase of the first episode of the Crystal Crisis on Utapau's story arc. However, come the production of the Disney Plus season, Mace's model was also upgraded to use actual sleeves, with the animation technology becoming more feasible in the time since the original Clone Wars production. The Winding Cliff path used at the start of the episode was one of the biggest sets they had created at the time, though since making the episode, they have come up with a more efficient way to create the scenery that doesn't require them to build it to scale and painstakingly hand paint it. Mace's dedicated clones have since faced some level of contradiction due to this episode. When the episode initially aired, it featured Commander Poddins, but didn't go as far on screen as associating him in his brown armor to be a Legion specific to Mace. Though come the production of the Bad Batch arc, he was retroactively associated with the 187th Battalion, with story group member Leland Chi stating that Mace's expanded universe purple clones was something that was decided against depicting during the production of Liberty on Ryloth, with them making Mace's entire clones in this story arc the same brown colour as Poddins. To further add confusion, the purple Mace clones have since been included within the reset continuity with their original title of the 187th Legion. The ARF troopers make their first appearance in the actual series within this episode, with their scenes for the Clone Wars movie being newly created specifically for it after its 4 production episodes were later combined. It is highly likely that their asset was actually created for this episode and retroactively added into the movie. Rob Coleman wanted the area where Mace spies on the droids to be reminiscent of a World War I battlefield, which starkly depicted it being populated with destroyed droid machinery. The scene featuring the droids finding RB-551, one of the older models, was cut from the original aired version of the episode. However, it was reinstated in the director's cut that is featured on the physical media release. A reference to the Phantom Menace version of the battle droids is made by one of the Clone Wars era droids in this episode, stating how the destroyed droid they came across is one of those older models controlled by a central computer, which, as we know, the destruction of the Trade Federation Lucrehulk central computer was the key to freeing Naboo from its droid occupation. Commander Pons has some Aurebesh written on the back of his helmet that reads, "Some guys have all the luck," and another Aurebesh phrase is seen on a Republic display screen. "Trouble on the horizon. Status report of Advanced Trooper Recognition Therapy Syndrome Evolution Team. Current phase of experiment, proceeding satisfactorily according to projected schedule." This is followed by "Second most important sport, right after football." Ryloth features huge mushroom-like maces that appear as if they are frozen mid-eruption, being an element that references the expanded universe depiction of Ryloth. This was sort of a middle ground that was achieved after Lucas disregarded the EU's direct depiction of the planet, with the main city featured in this episode, Lesu City, being one that's carved out of the side of one of them, with designer Jackson Z basing it off of the Lord of the Rings city, Minas Tirith, after reading the script for the episode. A more expanded version of Lesu's landing area with the hyena bombers exists within the concept design for the location, but this was scaled back for the final episode, presumably due to production limitations. Cham Syndulla makes his debut in this episode, with his design sheet being used for the hologram info log that Mace Windu brings up. His first name is derived from charm, and his second from sin, to allude to him either being a protagonist or an antagonist, as revealed by Henry Gilroy on the Aggressive Negotiations podcast. Originally, Cham was envisioned as a spiritual religious leader of the Twi'leks, who in fact was deceiving them and working with Wat Tambor, who would have fled with him at the end of the episode, with Cham's initial 2D design options depicting alternative versions of him with an eye patch and a mask, having more wearable accessories overall that would have fit more with this characterization. This original version of Cham could have even been inspired by Denethor, also from the Lord of the Rings, who shares the characteristic of being a prophetic leader. Filoni and Gilroy couldn't work out how to get that version of the character to work properly, replacing that villain role with another tactical droid, and deciding that Cham worked much better as the genuine leader of Ryloth's freedom fighters who were trying to free their home from the Separatists, with him seeing the clones as just another army who's occupying his world, questioning who is on the right side. Cham's blaster was based off of Han Solo's, with him being a freedom fighter, thus being based off of the good guy persona that Han has in the original trilogy. There are also design options for a female freedom fighter, where she only appears in easy-to-miss group shots. Perhaps at one point, Cham was meant to be depicted with a wife and child to make us more sympathetic to his cause, way before he would be given a deceased wife and daughter within the development of Star Wars Rebels. It seems that they would also use this female Twi'leks concept for Sula Quain, with the middle design even somewhat resembling what her Bad Batch design would be. Cham is seemingly featured with an unnamed daughter in this episode. To support this, The child shares the same skin colour as him, though if this was indeed the case, she has since been retconned as someone else's child during the development of Star Wars Rebels, which established main character Hera as Cham's daughter, as well as her only having a deceased male sibling. The character model seems to be that of a reskinned Numa, with Pablo Hidalgo on Rebels Recon stating that as the leader of a freedom fighter movement, Cham hugging children would be something that he'd do. The character is interestingly focused on at the end of the episode, despite never being 100% confirmed as being related to Syndulla. It could have been intended as a way for them to hint that Ryloth being freed has allowed Syndulla's child to have a better future, though she is probably now used to represent the future of Ryloth as a whole. Cham Syndulla being the first revolutionary character in the Clone Wars is a precursor to Saw Gerrera, who George Lucas at this point had probably still intended to make his debut in the unproduced Star Wars Underworld project, with Saw Gerrera essentially overshadowing Cham since his frequent inclusion in projects set between the two Lucas trilogies. Though the difference between Saw and Cham is that Cham still ultimately had family, meanwhile Saw lost all of his. The freedom fighters as a whole, with their French accents, would have been inspired by the World War II French resistance fighters. Their accents hint at perhaps some past history of space colonization. Star Wars would yet again use the French resistance inspiration for the people of Gorman within Andor Season 2. It would have been fitting for the freedom fighters to use a disused church as their secret base of operations, especially in the original iteration of the story, where Cham was a religious villain working with the Separatists. The interior of the ATTE makes its debut within this episode, being designed by Russell Chong, who also added the back section of them that stored the AT-ATs, something that the script itself specifically mentioned. Filoni likened the AT-ATs to velociraptors, with them also having BEA depicted on their side in Aurebesh. Blurgs make their first production appearance within this episode, having made a previous chronological one in the later produced CW224 supply lines. They are used to contrast against the clones' AT-AT walkers, showing how the Twi'leks care more about the nature on their world compared to the clones. Orn Free Tar also makes his debut in this episode as Ryloth's corrupt senator. He is seen frequently throughout the show after this episode as a Senate background character, and also got a role in the Hostage Crisis episode when asset limitations preventing Mas Amedda from being included in the episode. Wat Tambor, another legacy character, makes his full return here after debuting in hologram form in the story arc's past 2 episodes, with his design in both this episode and his original appearance not featuring any legs, showing him essentially wheel himself about. In his first appearance in Attack of the Clones, he only had a single line of dialogue, voiced by Ben Burt. Matthew Wood, who had worked with Ben Burt for 15 years, decided to replicate this voice. Tambor would have been retroactively added into CW115 and CW117 after they had created his asset for this episode. This model would also be retroactively added into the newsreel for the Clone Wars movie. Tambor has multiple titles. Besides the previously established foreman of the Techno Union, he is also referred to as Emir, which was something George Lucas added to give him a level of prestige, with him being greedy and stealing treasure from the planet, including the Ark of the Covenant, though it had been altered ever so slightly to include a Twi'lek cherubim on top. Tambor, despite being arrested at the end of this episode, is somehow freed by the events of the Bad Batch arc, despite also being displayed as being imprisoned by the Republic within the Wrong Jedi story arc. Tambor stealing treasures from Ryloth is a clear nod to how the Nazis stole a bunch of French paintings when they occupied the country. The recently released clip from the unfinished Bounty Hunter arc involving Anakin and Mace on Coruscant makes me wonder, perhaps the plot of that episode included the Bounty Hunters breaking out a bunch of previously arrested Separatists, including Wat Tambor. which could have been used as a way to lure out Mace Windu into a position where Boba could try and assassinate him again, with Tambor's updated design that we see in both the original production reels for the Bad Batch arc, as well as the twins' final season produced episodes, could have actually been made for CW 524, the third episode of the unfinished Bounty Hunter arc, with there being no known design sheets confirming this updated design's origin to CW 609, A Distant Echo, being publicly released. The Hyena Bombers make their debut in this episode when they are instructed by Wat Tambor to bomb the inhabited towns. Their design is larger than the average Vulture Droid starfighter, with them being dedicated to dropping bombs on a specified target, with Russell Chong designing them to be reminiscent of the TIE bombers from The Empire Strikes Back. Chong scaled up the size of the Vulture Droid and gave it a second head underneath, which would have a symbiotic relationship with the regular one on top, where they communicate with each other to calculate the trajectory of their targets. Unique sound design is used for the sequence where the droids shut off the holobridge, with all the music being silenced and focusing on Mace's echoey force vision, with it giving us a glimpse into what is going on inside his head at this given moment. The commando droids, seen briefly at the end of the episode, do not have their eyes lit up. The pronunciation of Twi'lek includes both Twi and Twi, with Filoni and Gilroy stating it depends on the side of the planet you're on. The production team thought that this story really came together well, cohesively being a subject matter that they wanted to explore. All three Tar's promise of the clones leaving Ryloth once they are liberated is clearly something that doesn't actually happen, as by the time of the Bad Batch, there are still clones stationed on the planet. Though considering that there is an unfinished Clone Wars arc, planned for what was meant to be the show's 8th and final season before its production was stopped in March 2013, that heavily featured one of Ryloth's moons, perhaps there was to be another attack on the planet before the end of the war that had the clones return, considering Palpatine ultimately wanted to make Ryloth part of his empire, with him being able to use the excuse that the clones must stay, otherwise the Separatists would just keep re-attacking it. Gobi would return in both the Bad Batch Season 1 episodes that took place on Ryloth, as well as in the same Star Wars Rebels episodes that featured Numa, after he made a very brief appearance in this episode, with him also resembling some of the unspecific male Twi'leks. While the Ryloth arc ended up as a three-parter, according to Stephen Melching in an interview with Rebel Force Radio in May 2009, the arc was initially planned as a four-parter, with Melching providing a script for an episode that was ultimately not taken forward to produce, with a further podcast for Clone Wars Season 4 having them mention that the Ryloth arc was initially planned as a quadrilogy, with the episode being a big part of the story before plans changed. The script for the episode was repurposed into the In Service of the Republic strand of the Dark Horse Clone Wars comic series as issues 7, 8 and 9. The title itself was reused from the initial title they used for CW 114 that would be renamed to Rookies before the end of that episode's production. From this 3-issue comic adaptation, we can tell what took place in this episode. The 3 comic issues feature Plo Koon and Kit Fisto with a cowardly Captain Ozell before his time in the Empire, who are up against Asajj Ventress and a Separatist weather machine while trying to free the Khorne people. This story would have taken place on Ryloth, where the 2 Jedi had to defeat Ventress and destroy the weather machine, while probably dealing with the repercussions of Captain Ozell's decisions and freeing captured Twi'leks. It's most likely that this would have been the second episode of the story arc, with the destruction of the weather machine allowing Obi-Wan and Mace to continue with the plan to liberate Nabat and then the capital. During this comic series, Ventress causes Commander Wolf's eye injury that seems to come out of nowhere within the Clone Wars show itself, with Wolf's next appearance in Holocron Heist showing he has already had his eye replaced with a glass one. Perhaps the original intention was for this to happen on screen during the Ryloth arc, but got cut when this episode was discarded, with them still deciding to keep Wolf's Glass eye injury in future episodes of the show as a nod to this story having happened. This makes it even sadder that the 2014 canon reset removed these comic issues from the same continuity as the Clone Wars, considering they were originally created as tie-in material for the show, separate from the expanded universe. If this was indeed the plot of the episode, it also means that Ventress was cut from an additional episode of Season 1 after she was cut from CW105, Bombad Jedi, alongside Quinlan Voss due to asset limitations, where in that story she was to be disguised as a beautiful red-haired woman that Voss would duel, with it ultimately leading to her real appearance of a bald banshee being revealed to him, with this version of the story also being written as a single episode story where Gumray would escape, which explains why it's 5 entire production episodes before CW110, Cloak of Darkness, where they decided to instead make the Gumray arc a 3-parter. If Ventress was a part of the Ryloth arc, she would have had a more substantial final appearance within production Season 1 compared to her lackluster cameo in CW114 Rookies that ultimately became her last appearance outside of the flashback Hidden Enemy episode for quite some time, which itself was down to the show coming up with new stories to tell throughout production Season 2 that they didn't think she'd fit into. The Ryloth arc would get a pseudo 4th episode come the end of production Season 2 with CW224 supply lines, with Stephen Melching even returning to be a writer on it. This could have been to make up for the fact that his original penned Ryloth episode was scrapped, with the initial pitch of this episode even possibly being that original script before it evolved into the episode that connected Ambush and the 3 other Ryloth episodes together. Maybe instead of the Weather Machine plot, it could have been that Kit Fisto and Plo Koon had to smuggle supplies into enemy lines. Perhaps the episode was never produced due to the script being too ambitious and costly for the development team to pull off at the time, with Catherine Winder potentially not taking it to Lucas because of this, with the Ryloth arc being produced in the middle of production Season 1 before a bunch of episodes that would ultimately be pushed to air before it. Though, it could have also been that they didn't want to use Ventress as a villain again, because the more time she'd lose, the more diminished she'd be as a threat. Another reason could be that it was because this was around the time that George Lucas stepped up to pitch the plots of the episodes directly, leading to it potentially being a casualty of that decision, with episodes like Dooku Captured being decided on instead, with Lucas potentially thinking at the time that the Ryloth arc being 3 episodes was long enough, considering they didn't decide to produce 4 episode arcs until the time they were producing episodes for Season 4. Whatever the decision, ultimately the story would be made into the comic instead, adapting each act of the episode into a separate issue, which on the plus side gave us another interesting snow planet alongside cool snowcoat designs for Plo Koon and Kit Fisto. However, this would not be the only storyline that Gilroy and Melching would create for Season 1, which was rejected. In this edition of What Happened to That Glup Shitto, we have Martook. Originally, Martook was planned to die at the conclusion of Storm over Ryloth, complete with him admitting defeat by responding to a battle droid when it asked him, what do they do next, with quote, "We die." However, George Lucas and the production team liked the character, so wrote in an escape for him late in Storm over Ryloth's development, having him survive via an escape pod. Despite this though, the character has never been seen again, and unlike the previous Neimoidium featured within this video section, Loch Durd has not even appeared in a novel or been referenced. I think that alongside Loch Durd and Newt Gumray, Martook would have originally been a reoccurring character, part of a Neimoidian rogues gallery of sorts, but due to Lucas wanting to make it more clear that the Trade Federation was supposed to be this neutral force in the war who profited from both sides, they dropped this approach and decided to only feature Neimoidians within political stories involving the Senate. Martuk could have returned in the unfinished Rex and R2 story arc, considering its return setting to Ryloth. We don't know where his escape pod ultimately ended up. Maybe it surfaced on one of Ryloth's moons, and Martuk could have somehow been involved within the plot that writer Brent Friedman has described as being influenced by Terminator 2 and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, as well as stating how it went to some dark and unexpected places. If the theory I mentioned in my video about this unfinished arc is true, and there was this weird duplicating alien on the moon, maybe Martuk became one of its victims, and was written into the arc as having perished, with the B2 battle droid Rex and R2 find being a member of his droid forces. We also have the question mark that is the unfinished Padme arc, posed to be the political arc to end them all, being the political yin to the Siege of Mandalore's action-orientated yang. It's always possible that Martuk could have made a return here, if not in the Rex and R2 arc, either being a part of the Separatist Council with tie keys or having rejoined with the other Neimoidians representing the Trade Federation. Something could have happened in this arc to make them publicly denounce the Republic and join the Separatists, which by Revenge of the Sith they have done, as they are in the fleet attacking Coruscant. It's always possible that Martuk's death was caused by something to do with the Republic that led to this. Maybe Palpatine decides to weaponize their previous occupation of Naboo against them as an excuse for the Republic to seize control of their operations, only for them to retaliate by joining the Separatist cause fully. The Ryloth arc is a highlight from the Clone Wars' first season, having 3 distinctive perspectives of an ongoing battle to liberate a planet. Storm over Ryloth gives us a great look into what it is like for Ahsoka to be put into the commander role at such a young age, with her snippiness getting the better of her, leading to severe casualties, which causes her to take a step back and question whether she's really fit for this role. By the end of the episode, with her deciding to use the Mark Sable maneuver, it confirms it to herself that she is, with her learning that perhaps she should listen to her peers more. Ahsoka did also have a point with how Anakin wanted to continue the attack blindly, considering she saw firsthand what that led to, which made Anakin question and change his own tactics, learning something himself, at the same time also forcing Ahsoka to conquer her insecurities by putting her directly in command, which enabled both of them to grow from the experience. Martuk stating that he knows who Anakin is reminds me of the Harriet Jones Doctor Who gag, where everyone knows who she is every time she introduces herself. Storm over Ryloth also makes me think about what Yularen could have personally thought about Ahsoka supposedly bombing the Jedi Temple in Season 5, with him having spent a lot of time with her and Anakin throughout the war, and supporting her in this episode. He could have been someone who found it hard to believe, considering like Anakin and Padme, he knew her and had directly worked with her in the past. Had Ahsoka stayed in the Order, would he have supported her execution as part of Order 66? And what about the other admirals who closely worked with the Jedi, who got to know them on this level? Did they just blindly accept that their Jedi commanders and generals were all traitors to the Republic after being so loyal to it for the entire war? It's a shame that the episode with the weather station with Kit Fisto and Plo Koon was never produced, as that would have allowed us more screen time for both of the characters, especially considering the show wouldn't really use them that much in future seasons, outside of Fisto being featured in the Mon Cala arc, but also because they've not had any on-screen appearances since the Clone Wars was cancelled. Innocence of Ryloth paints an interesting picture, with the clones showing initially how they show little care for the Ryloth citizens and just want to get their job done like every other battle, with this narrow-sighted view being completely upended when Waxer and Boyle encounter Numa and have to learn how to actually deal with the oppressed victims of the war, with the portrayal of Numa being very effective, with you easily sympathising and feeling bad for her, considering how her life has been destroyed by the Separatists. Innocence of Ryloth is one I remember personally having seen on Cartoon Network during UK morning reruns of the show, which was how I originally watched the show and enabled me to practically see the entire show, even if it wasn't on release day, including the same episode multiple times. Rewatching Innocence of Ryloth, knowing that Waxer dies within the Season 4 Umbara arc, makes his focus in this episode retroactively more important, with it adding to the tragicness of his death at the hands of a corrupt Jedi General who had no idea of the humanity that Waxer portrayed in this episode. It is humorous how TX-20 did not expect the people he captured would eventually revolt and take back control, with them absolutely going to town on the droid for holding them hostage. It's a shame that the Star Wars Rebels production team didn't put Waxer in Aurebesh on Numa's model instead of Boyle, considering Waxer was much more sympathetic to her at first, and it could have also been a way for her to honour his memory after he had died on Umbara, which she could have somehow found out afterwards. Perhaps on one of the missions as part of the Free Ryloth movement, she could have gained access to an Imperial database and searched for known dead clones. It's a testament to how good the writing of the show as well as all stages of the production are that you are able to really feel for Numa when she is only given one episode, compared to other Star Wars shows produced post-Clone Wars that like to focus on the same set of key characters for their entire multi-season duration. Liberty on Ryloth gives us our Jedi focus episode on Mace Windu and pairs him up with Cham Syndulla. Cham's question of how long until he'll be fighting the Jedi is an interesting one, and brings up the question of would they have served the Empire, which is highly unlikely despite them serving in the Clone Wars. Though people like Cham see the Jedi as the figureheads of the movement, so he must have been at least a bit surprised to hear that the Jedi supposedly betrayed the Republic, with him probably figuring it out pretty quickly then that the war wasn't the Jedi's doing after all. The creation of the tactical droid to make a reusable villain more inept than the battle droids would lead to the same problem happening with them, where the production team ended up creating the super tactical droid to be even more cunning, as by that point in the show, the tactical droids had become less of a believable threat, like the regular battle droids. The ending of Innocence of Ryloth suggests that Kenobi goes with Windu to take the capital, but in the following episode, Kenobi is not featured, with him only getting a brief reference by Windu of having already taken the other part of the planet. Perhaps the original intention was to have Kenobi with Mace before they decided against making Cham a villain, and thus removing the need for Kenobi in the story. I really enjoy Windu's characterization in this episode, where he doesn't care about the politics and just wants to do whatever he can to help the people of this world, which is a good quality for a Jedi to have. They can clearly see those in need who are being oppressed, not letting these other things prevent the goal of removing that oppression. Windu is here purely to free the people, with Cham Syndulla's help being the only way he can. It's funny how even Dooku knows that Windu is much superior to Wat Tambor, with them all knowing that Tambor's greed with stealing all of the different artifacts from the planet is clouding his judgment, and as we know by the end of the episode, becomes his undoing, when both Windu abuses his determination to stay by infiltrating the transports he's awaiting, as well as TA-175 finally having enough of his refusal to leave, so leaves without him, leading to his capture, with the overall aspect of Tambor's selfishness ultimately being the reason why the Separatists lose, being a very entertaining one, with his comeuppance being much deserved. The Jedi being the faces of the war is something that Palpatine 100% utilised to his advantage to turn the population of the galaxy against the Jedi, making everyone think that the war is because of them, with the wedge between the uninformed everyday citizen and the Jedi on the front lines being focused on more within later seasons of the show, as well as some of the unfinished story arcs. The editorial process, sharing a lot in common with a live-action project, as well as the mention of the Clone Wars reinventing the wheel in terms of how episodic TV is produced, reminds me how George Lucas also intended to apply this process to his live-action show, codenamed Underworld, that sadly was too costly for even Lucas to produce, with no network wanting to take up the cost of licensing it either, though HBO did come close, as previously mentioned in my video specifically covering Underworld. This story arc is an early production example of how the team like to do these multi-part interconnected stories, with this being something they do by default within later production seasons, with all of the unproduced story arcs that were dropped due to the March 2013 cancellation, even pushing this further by having story threads planned throughout multiple arcs, with them by that point planning to produce those stories in what was meant to be 100% chronological order, which allowed them to add more of these connections. I also notice a running theme within 2 of the episodes of this arc, where the villains download the information they have gathered on the Jedi Generals, with this being another indication that the war has gone on for long enough that the Separatists are collecting receipts on their enemies. Something I noticed while rewatching this story arc for the video is how quick it seemed to go by, with it being a very investable story and one of the top tier arcs of the first season that is essential viewing for people who want to see a major milestone in the early days of Lucasfilm Animation's output. I now have an active channel membership available. This will grant you exclusive perks like emojis in the comments, usernames listed in my outros, and updates to what's coming next posted exclusively for members in the community tab. But the best feature is you get 5 days early access to new videos and you will be supporting me at the same time. To find out more, you can click the join button on my channel page. Thank you to anyone who considers becoming a channel member. Thank you for watching. Please see the video description below for interesting links, sources and credits. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe and comment, as it will really help the channel continue to grow further. Until the next time, goodbye.